Some would say the geopolitical posturing and global economic fluctuations we've been watching are simply another day in a world defined by change. There's always a conflict somewhere, always another market correction, always another technology company promising to redraw the boundaries of what machines can do. And maybe that's true. But this summer feels different. The heat coming off these rapid developments seemed especially intense. The war in Iran is reshaping geopolitical calculations almost by the hour. The competition between the houses of AI and big tech has reached a fever pitch, with each company racing to build the most capable model, the most useful agent, and the platform none of us could afford to operate without. Meanwhile, the cost of almost everything seems unpredictable whenever the markets twitch. It's difficult to look away because every development appears consequential. Governments are repositioning, capital is moving, technology is advancing at a pace that makes last month's breakthrough feel old before people have even figured out what it means. In this kind of environment, our attention naturally follows the loudest threat. We focus on what's burning now, the conflict, the market, the latest model release, the decision that has to be made by Friday. But the risks that change history are not always the ones making the most noise. Sometimes they begin quietly, in research laboratories and technical communities, while the rest of the world is watching something else. That's where this story begins. Because while governments are recalculating power and the houses of AI are competing to become the operating layer for human work, another technological frontier is advancing just outside the center of public attention: neurotechnology, brain-computer interfaces. Systems capable of translating neural activity into text, speech, movement, and machine commands. The human benefit could be extraordinary. A person who's lost the ability to speak may be able to communicate again. Someone living with paralysis may regain a measure of independence. A prosthetic limb may respond more naturally to the intent of the person using it. That's the promise, and it deserves to be taken seriously. But history has also taught us that when capability outruns security, the consequences eventually reciprocate. We saw it with the early internet, when systems designed for connection were deployed long before anyone fully understood how they could be abused. We saw it with mobile technology, cloud computing, social media, and the Internet of Things. The pattern is familiar. The technology works, adoption accelerates, investment pours in, and only then does somebody raise a hand and ask the uncomfortable question: what happens when this thing gets hacked? With neurotechnology, that question carries more weight, because this time, the attack surface may not stop at the device. It may extend into the human nervous system. The paper I want to walk through with you is titled "Threat Vectors and the State of the Art in Defense Methods for Security in Neurotechnology." It was written by Bryce Allen Bagley, Nathaniel Rose, Quintus Kilbourne, and Dr. Matthew Canham. I came to know Dr. Canham and Bryce Bagley through my membership in the Cognitive Security Institute. That connection matters because this was not a paper I encountered as a random download during an afternoon search. I was already familiar with the broader community of people working to understand how cybersecurity, neuroscience, artificial intelligence, human factors, and cognition are beginning to converge. One of the things I appreciate about that community is its refusal to pretend that a single discipline can solve this problem. A cybersecurity professional may understand attack paths, but lack a working knowledge of neurophysiology. A neuroscientist may understand how signals are generated, but not how a compromised software dependency could alter the system interpreting them. A machine learning researcher may understand model performance, while overlooking the question of who owns the decision when the model gets it wrong. These aren't isolated problems. They're interacting problems. That's exactly why the interdisciplinary nature of this paper immediately caught my attention. The authors examine neurotechnology as a complete system, moving from supply chains and hardware to signal acquisition, machine learning models, cloud infrastructure, cognitive processes, and governance. They don't treat the brain-computer interface as a magical black box. They unroll it and show us the seams. As I read the paper, I began to recognize something familiar. The authors were approaching neurosecurity from the technical side of the bridge. The Cyber Explorer cognitive security body of knowledge had been approaching many of the same concerns from the side of human judgment, Machine-mediated influence, intent, and decision authority. We weren't describing identical territory, but we were clearly looking across the same river. The paper provides a technical anatomy of the neurotechnology attack surface. The CE body of knowledge asks, what happens when that attack surface reaches beyond the confidentiality of neural data and begins to affect perception, interpretation, trust, intent, and human agency? That's the connective tissue I want to explore with you. The paper's central warning isn't that every brain-computer interface will be compromised tomorrow. It warns that neurotechnology is already becoming complex enough that security can't be bolted on after deployment. The authors identify vulnerabilities across the entire BCI cycle and argue that security research is not keeping pace with the technology's capabilities. That gap between capability and protection is where trouble tends to grow. Early in the paper, the authors present a diagram of the brain-computer interface cycle. Many BCI diagrams are drawn as circles. A signal leaves the brain, passes through a device, gets processed, triggers an action, and returns as feedback. It's clean, compact, and looks manageable. The authors make a different choice. They unroll the cycle. Once it's stretched into a line, the system begins to look less like a single device and more like a chain of trust. There's the brain itself, the acquisition hardware, the analog signal path, the conversion of that signal into data, the software, the model interpreting the data, the communications links, the cloud environment, the application receiving the result, the action taken on behalf of the user. Every link depends on the one before it. That's the first point where the paper connected deeply with the CE body of knowledge. In traditional cybersecurity, we tend to ask whether a system was accessed, whether information was altered, or whether a service was interrupted. Those questions remain necessary, but cognitive security adds another layer. Did the compromise alter what the human perceived, intended, decided, or was believed to have decided? A compromised sensor can corrupt the data entering the model. A compromised model can produce a false interpretation. That false interpretation can be treated as authentic human intent. The resulting action may then affect the person physically, financially, medically, or legally. That's a very different consequence chain from the loss of a database. The breach may begin in hardware, pass through software, and end inside a decision attributed to a human being. And that's where this stops being a story about just protecting neural data. It becomes a story about protecting agency. The paper eventually arrives at governance, and one of its strongest arguments is that conventional consent may be structurally inadequate for neural data. I agree. Consent assumes that the person can understand what they are agreeing to. But how do you explain the future meaning of data when the future decoder has not yet been invented? How does someone evaluate the risk of a neural recording that appears limited today, but may reveal something deeply personal 10 years from now? How do you describe secondary uses that do not yet exist? How do you explain the consequences of combining neural data with location history, browsing behavior, health records, purchasing patterns, and AI interaction logs? At some point, consent collapses under the weight of complexity. We've already seen this with digital privacy. People click agree because declining means they can't use the service. The legal record says permission was granted. The practical reality is that participation required surrender. That's not meaningful consent. It's coerced convenience. The paper points toward a fiduciary model in which organizations holding neural data would owe duties of loyalty, care, and confidentiality. That connects directly with my work on fiduciary AI risk exposure. Permission asks whether the user agreed. Fiduciary responsibility asks whether the organization should exploit that agreement. Those are different standards. Medical history offers a warning. Modern informed consent didn't emerge because powerful institutions voluntarily decided to give up control. It emerged after people were harmed, often because the individuals bearing the risk had far less knowledge and power than the people designing the experiment. Neurotechnology may create an even sharper asymmetry. The company understands the model, the engineer understands the sensor, the cloud provider understands the infrastructure. The user may understand only that the device helps them speak, move, focus, or live more independently. That imbalance should create a greater duty of care, not a weaker one. The paper recommends familiar controls: zero trust, secure boot, signed firmware, cryptographic attestation, post-quantum encryption, differential privacy, formal verification, and hardware roots of trust. All of those controls matter. But the paper's deeper contribution is not the list. It is the insistence that security must extend across the entire cycle. The device must be verified. The firmware must be verified. The origin of the signal must be understood. The model version must be traceable. The training data must have provenance. The inference must be bounded. The human must be able to challenge the output, and the authority to act must remain visible. That's the difference between network-centric trust and decision-centric trust. A system can authenticate every component and still produce an unsafe or falsely attributed decision. Technical integrity is necessary. Decision integrity is the objective. Cyber explorers, this is the part I want you to sit with. A clean log does not guarantee a clean signal. A faithful transcript does not guarantee a faithful decision. And a human being somewhere in the loop does not prove that human judgment remained intact. If that idea changes how you think about AI assurance or emerging technology, share this video with a colleague who still believes the audit trail always tells the whole story. An audit trail tells the story the system was capable of recording. That may not be the same story that actually occurred. The paper closes with an analogy from cryptography engineering. Some security systems are built like a tent, with a bank vault door attached to the front. Everyone argues about the quality of the lock while ignoring the fact that the walls are canvas. That analogy stays with me because it describes how organizations often approach complex risk. The network team protects the network. The cloud team protects the cloud. The AI team evaluates the model. The privacy team reviews the consent language. The medical team evaluates clinical performance. The compliance team checks the documentation. Each group secures the part it understands. The attack moves through the seams. That's why neurosecurity will require a constellation of expertise rather than one central authority pretending to have every answer. The neuroscientist will see risks the software engineer may miss. The cybersecurity professional will see attack paths the clinical team may not anticipate. The human factors expert will notice when a technically correct system becomes behaviorally unsafe. The governance leader will see where accountability is disappearing between organizations. Decentralized leadership matters here, but it can't become decentralized accountability. Shared responsibility cannot become shared ambiguity. Everyone may contribute to the decision. Someone must still own it. So, what should cybersecurity and risk leaders do with this paper today? Don't run out and establish a massive neurosecurity program because someone in the organization purchased an EEG headset. That would be performative. Start by finding where the organization may already be collecting information capable of revealing something about cognition or neurological state. That could include wearables, accessibility tools, human performance monitoring, fatigue detection, eye tracking, voice analysis, behavioral analytics, health research, or adaptive training systems. Then look at retention. Is the organization keeping the data longer than the purpose requires? Is it evaluating future inferential risk, or only what can be decoded now? Look at provenance. Can the organization establish where the signal originated, which device captured it, which firmware processed it, which model interpreted it, and what transformations occurred along the way? Then look at decision authority. Can the model's interpretation trigger an action? Can a person challenge that interpretation? Can the organization distinguish between genuine user intent and machine attribution? Finally, look at governance. Who owns the risk when the system crosses cybersecurity, privacy, medicine, AI, legal, and human factors boundaries? When the answer is everybody, the practical answer may be nobody. When engineers inspect a bridge, they don't wait for it to collapse before deciding whether the load calculations were correct. They test the materials, they inspect the joints, they model stress, they assume that weather, vibration, time, and repeated use will reveal weaknesses that were invisible on opening day. Emerging technology deserves that same discipline. especially when the bridge connects human thought to machine action. This paper doesn't argue that every attack it describes will occur. It does something more responsible. It shows that the attack surface is already broad enough that waiting would be reckless. The paper asks us to secure neurotechnology before it becomes ordinary. My cognitive security body of knowledge takes that concern one step further. It asks us to protect not only the device, the signal, and the model, but the human capacity to perceive, decide, and act without hidden manipulation or false attribution. Because once technology begins interpreting the human mind, security can no longer stop at protecting information. It must protect agency. Listen, we are early. That is not a reason to dismiss the issue. It is the reason to study it now. Like the video, follow Cyber Explorer, and share this conversation with the people who should be helping shape what comes next. I'm Alan. Thanks for exploring with me.